I'm Sam.
And this is Gabe.
And this is Coaster Wars.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Coaster Wars podcast, the only podcast that we take two roller coasters, compare them to each other, make fun of our co-hosts, and enjoy our time.
You're just salty about our last episode. That's what this is.
What was our last episode?
Our special episode where I had to quiz you.
Yes. That was our last episode.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? That was your freaking idea, so I don't know why you give me so much shit about it.
It was not my idea. I don't know what you're talking about.
Whatever. Why don't we get into this episode? Because this is going to be a fun one.
This is going to be a fun one, definitely. We have probably the two most similar coasters we've ever compared on this podcast, which is hilarious because they're still from two different manufacturers.
That is actually pretty funny, and that's a good point, is we try to kind of pride ourselves on comparing coasters you wouldn't normally put side by side, but these two actually sort of deserve to be compared. And it's like you said, I don't know that too many people have really sat down and compared these two, but like you said, they're due different manufacturers. They're quite a bit of difference in the time period that they were built, but it's gonna be a good one. I think we got ourselves a good battle on our hands.
Yeah, two coasters that do share a lot of comparisons. One's obviously a little bit newer than the other. They use two different systems, but two coasters that have a lot of similarities. And when we go through this, it'll be glaringly obvious how similar these two coasters really are.
Yeah, without further ado, why don't you introduce our fighters?
All right. In the red corner, standing at a height of 150 feet and reaching a top speed of 75 miles per hour. Hailing from the hills of Pennsylvania and the Intamin Gym, it is Stormrunner. In the blue corner, standing at a height of 175 feet and reaching a top speed of 78 miles per hour. Hailing from the farm fields of Illinois and the SNS Gym, it is Maxx Force. Let the fight begin. All right, so the coaster that I'm bringing to this episode is Maxx Force. One thing we do need to mention right away is I have not ridden Stormrunner. I've not experienced that coaster, so it'll be a little bit of an interesting podcast.
And the one that I brought is Stormrunner, which is out in Hershey Park in Pennsylvania.
So two launch coasters, two coasters that feature extreme launch tracks. So both the top speeds on each coaster are the launch speed, the initial launch speed. So Stormrunner being 75 miles an hour and Maxx Force being 78. However, Maxx Force is quite a bit higher at 25 feet, only being 3 mile per hour faster launch. I think the biggest thing between these two coasters, I think we have to say, is pacing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because Stormrunner, when we talk about Stormrunner, it's just a funky little coaster. It's got some really weird inversions, and on top of that, Stormrunner has a top hat on it, which adds a little element that Maxx Force doesn't really have, and it's Stormrunner. The best way to describe it is it's really quirky and sort of awkward, but still a lot of fun.
Well, both of these coasters you could describe as quirky, I think. Both these coasters you could describe as different. Both of these coasters features inversions that you cannot find on any other roller coaster, which is something really interesting and we need to dive into a little bit. Let's just go right into Maxx Force since we both were in that coaster.
Okay.
So Maxx Force is an SNS coaster. It features their compressed air launch. I think it's the best launch in North America. I feel like that's where your coaster is going to fall flat a little bit in this comparison. But it has two inversions that are unique to this roller coaster, the Dog Ton and the Max Dive Loop. Let's just dive right into the layout. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
This roller coaster, you get loaded in a nice kind of like dragster style train. They were kind of like playing off a Top Thrill dragster a little bit, I think, in that aspect.
Oh, yeah.
And then this roller coaster rolls forward into the launch track. The one very interesting thing that me and you both noticed right away about this roller coaster is it never fully stops on the launch track. It does this little, like, it'll go forward a little bit and then go backwards a little bit and then go forward. And it, like, just kind of, like, sits there and bounces back and forth until it, like, finds, like, the perfect spot. And then it launches. I have no idea what that is. I can't tell you what that is, but it's something you can visibly see it.
Yeah. And I just want to, like, other launch coasters, they do have that thing where, like, it'll inch forward to kind of get locked into place. And then it does physically stop, and then they launched. Maxx Force doesn't do that, and he's very right. It's really a interesting experience. And then something I do want to point out, because Gabe's kind of like that guy who likes to have fun with people. So when we ride this ride, he'll purposely, because he knows that it does this, he'll purposely take one of those, like, movements forwards, and he'll scream as loud as he can. He usually gets a couple laughs out of people. It is pretty funny.
Yeah, I like to mess with people and see if I can scare them. Sometimes I time it, like, completely perfect, though, and then I don't get to scare anyone. But
and you're like, oh.
So anyway, you roll forward into the launch track, and you get launched up to 78 miles per hour. The one thing I like to mention is it's under 2 seconds. So it is 0 to 78 miles an hour in under 2 seconds, which is a crazy, insane stat. Pretty much the only two launch tracks that can get that punch are an air launch and hydraulic launch, which is what these two roller coasters feature. So anyway, you get launched, you get a little bunny hill up over another section of track, and that's where you pop up into the first inversion, which is a dog tongue. That gets you up to your max height of 175 feet. A cool little tidbit is that when this roller coaster opened, that was the world's tallest inversion. Now that steel curtain has been constructed in Kennywood, that no longer holds that record. However, at 175 feet, that is still a crazy high number for an inversion, especially one like this where it kind of hangs you up there. You get a lot of hang time in this inversion. It's kind of like a implement tied with, like, almost a dive loop, but there's, like, a really weird turn at the top, and then it kind of just hangs you up there. It's a really interesting moment for any roller coaster, but just being at 175 feet is kind of jaw-dropping when you get up that high. So then you dive back towards the ground, and you go underneath that little bunny hop on the launch track, and that's where you turn up into the world's fastest inversion, and that is a 60-mile-an-hour Heartline roll, which is just absolutely crazy intense. One of the best moments on any roller coaster. There's not a lot of inversions that are better than that one. And then after that, that's where you pop up into the Maxx loop. I think, is that what they call it? Yeah, the Maxx dive loop. Again, it's another really interesting inversion where you kind of pop up, and you actually kind of, like, pop up almost into another roll, and then it kind of, like, hangs you sideways instead of fully rotating all the way back to center. And then you dive back towards the ground, and that dive loop takes you right into the station.
Yeah, I think they're starting to sort of experiment with the different inversions that they can put on roller coasters, but even they're trying to spice up and see what they can do. And Maxx Force is definitely a very interesting ride, and it's a very intense ride. Like you said, it gets you up to that 0 to 78, and it keeps that speed very well through this roller coaster. It's a very intense ride throughout the whole thing. Makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, really what it comes down to, though, is it is a very short layout. It's only about 25 seconds, I think, from launch to break. And this roller coaster is all about that initial launch, the 0 to 78 miles an hour in under 2 seconds. There's not another launch, I think, that comes even close to it. You can talk about Top Thrill. You can talk about King Ka. Now, obviously, top speed-wise, those coasters are going to win any day of the week.
Oh, yeah.
But just the sheer force and, like, acceleration G's that you pull in this roller coaster is just absolutely insane. I mean, you're talking one of the fastest accelerations ever on a roller coaster. And for me alone, that's what I love about Maxx Force. And it still has a really high top speed of almost 80 miles per hour. It's just, it's one of those launches where you can't really understand what it feels like unless you've ridden it. Like, you have to actually get on the coaster seat and get launched to comprehend what this coaster does to you. And you still have to do it like 3 or 4 times to really get a fully understanding, because you're launched and then you're at the top of that first inversion and you're like, wait, where'd the rest of the coaster go? Like, it's just, it's a really cool moment. It's my favorite launch I've ever experienced. And that's why when we did a launch coaster episode, I'm like, well, obviously this is the one I'm going to pick. So a really, really good launch and just a punchy launch. And then a Heartline roll is pretty much like my third favorite inversion of all time. And the only 2 that beat it are the Iron Gwazi Death Roll and the Goliath 0G Stall, which, I mean, if we're comparing this inversion to those inversions, that's in like the upper echelon of roller coaster moments. I definitely think this qualifies, doing basically a Heartline roll, a barrel roll at 60 miles per hour is insane.
Oh, yeah.
The one thing I like to compare it to is the Maverick Heartline roll that was supposed to exist. So we did an episode, a Cedar Point episode. We talked about that coaster a little bit. I estimated that you would be hitting that Heartline roll on Maverick at about 65 miles per hour. So you can understand why they had to take it out, right?
Oh,
Like,
yes, I can.
This is the world's fastest inversion at 60 miles per hour, and I would predict or estimate that you'd be hitting the Heartline roll on Maverick at about 65. So you can understand why it was too intense at the time for those trains and just riders in general.
I think there's something to be said to the fact that they built the roller coaster and were testing it and took it out before they even opened this ride to the public. They're like, we don't even want to put actual riders through it.
Yeah, so for those roller coaster enthusiasts out there, the Heartline roll on Maxx Force is about as close as you could get to what potentially the Heartline roll on Maverick was supposed to be. I think it's still not at the same level. I think the one on Maverick probably would have been a lot whippier coming in and out of the transition, where this one has a nice, really smooth turn and transition into the barrel roll. But yeah, this is pretty much the closest you could get to that. And I don't know, it's one of my favorite moments, like I said, of all time on any roller coasters. And just anything that you can do with speed in the roller coaster industry is a win for me, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Definitely one of my favorite moments. The more and more I talk about this coaster, I'm trying to figure out why it didn't make my top 15. Honestly, what I think it comes down to is just length. It's just a short ride experience.
So short. That's our biggest gripe with some of these roller coasters. I mean, we talked about that with Goliath. They were like, it would probably be higher on our list if it was just longer. And it's like, it does speak to the kind of caliber of ride it is, because that's the thing is you like, I want this, but please make it like 20 times longer and it'll like freaking, it would blow me away, but it's just too gosh darn short.
Maxx Force is one of those coasters we talked about at Great America that you could argue is the best in the park. I definitely put it on the same level as Goliath, and then obviously Raging Bull's the other, one that me and you appreciate a lot at that park. However, I wouldn't put it above either. I would say it's the third best coaster in the park, which is still, I mean, that's not short selling this coaster at all. I mean, there's a lot of good coasters at Great America, and to say this is the third best is putting it up there. Just like I said, it's a short ride experience. I will say this. It has one of my favorite restraint systems of all time. It's one of the few coasters. It's one of the few coasters I can sit in and be like, this is actually kind of comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see a lot of the new age S&S coasters here in the U.S., at least so far, other than their free spins, which we absolutely fucking hate. So to see, the new age S&S worldwide kind of developing and engineering coasters, I do want to get out to Kennywood and ride Steel Curtain, the 206-foot tall coaster with an inversion at the very top of the first drop. I think that would be insane to ride. That's the coaster that took the world's tallest inversion from this one. But yeah, S&S has been doing a lot of interesting and cool stuff. This is one of those coasters. It does have its reliability issues, though. We got to talk about that.
Yes.
Do you remember the first time trying to get me on this thing? Do you remember that?
My God, yeah, because me and Gabe went to the park, and we're those people now that we have to get the fast pass, and what happened was because
we're bougie roller coaster
oh
enthusiasts.
yes, and so the problem was because it's a new coaster. If anyone knows anything about the fast passes, you basically, if you buy the nice one, you get unlimited rides on any of their coasters. But because Maxx Force was such a new ride, they were only allowing you one ride with the fast pass. And of course it's one of those things where if you queue up the ride, that uses your one chance. And we were so afraid, it started having reliability issues, and I think we had to go back and get it fixed so that we could still get back on the ride. And then we were like paranoid about it. We like would walk over and make sure that the ride was running before we queued up in our fast pass, because we're like, we don't want to lose our one ride on this freaking ride.
Yeah, well, the one thing that we do need to mention here really quick, we got to transition here pretty soon.
Oh,
but
I know.
This is a coaster that you can hear from anywhere in the park launch because it's the compressed air.
Oh,
it literally
yeah.
sounds like a freaking,
Cannon
like you're getting
going
bombed
off
or something. Yeah, I can't. Yeah. So we'd hear it launch like for a test run, and we'd be like, "Oh, it's open!" So then we'd like ride whatever coaster we were on, and then like sprint over, and then it would be closed, and we're like, "What the hell?" And then the guy was like, "Oh yeah, they tested it twice, and then that was it." So. It was one of those things where it kept like teasing us, like, "Oh wait, is it running?" Oh no, it's not.
Yeah. So
but
real quick,
we eventually did get on it. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to talk about one time, I believe since you only get one ride in this, what me and Gabe ended up doing is we'd ride it once during the day, and then we would usually make it our last coaster at the end of the night, because then it doesn't matter. You just get in line and then wait for everything to go through. And I believe we got on it and it rolled forward to do its whole launch sequence, and then it broke down right there. We were waiting on it, and then a maintenance guy came out and they rolled us back, and we got off of it, and they're like, if we get it up and running again, we'll send you guys. So me and him were waiting, and then it never sent for the night. We ended up having to leave.
Yeah, that was one of the few experiences where we've actually been pulled off a roller coaster.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they pulled us off before they could ever even launch it. And that goes back to the whole launch system where it never really settles itself. I don't know if that has something to do with its reliability issues, or if that is something they put in to help its reliability issues. It's still a really quirky thing that it does, and you'll see when you go ride it, you'll see what we're talking about. But yeah, it was one of those things where we were on it, in the seats, strapped down, on the launch track, and then they could never actually launch us, and that was pretty disappointing as well. But I do have a few ride experiences on it now, so do you, and it's definitely one of the great coasters at Great America.
Yeah, so let's switch gears here a little bit. We're going to talk about Stormrunner, and this is an intimate launch coaster at Hershey Park in Pennsylvania. It is a hydraulic launch system. And now this coaster was built in May of 2004. And honestly, looking at this guy, it really kind of is a little bit of a predecessor to Maverick, but only a little bit. I mean, where I get saying that it's a predecessor to Maverick is because they kind of moved away from the giant launch coasters that they had in whatchamacallit, Top Thrill. And this one, it does have a top hat in it, but then it has these really quirky other little inversions, and it's not very big. It's 150 feet. It does have a drop of 180 feet, so it goes below grade. It is 90 degrees, but it's only about 2,600 feet of track, and it's an under a minute ride too. But when we talk about that launch, if we get into that launch a little bit, it is a 0 to 75 mile an hour launch in 2 seconds. So it is it's definitely not as good as Maxx Force. It doesn't quite punch you in the face like that ride does, but it is still a pretty hefty launch. And since it goes straight into the top hat, you go up 150 feet straight into the air, and it's pretty punchy. And then something I love about this ride too. So what happens is because this is like a hydraulic launch, it does the same thing where Okay, I'm gonna get into the engineering of this a little bit. When you have a hydraulic launch, what happens for this one at least is the train is pulled forward, and then it's actually a catch car that latches into the train, and that's technically what's launched forward, and then it just takes the train with it. And then once the train leaves that launch area, it detaches from the catch car and it goes through the rest of the roller coaster. So in this like couple second process where it kind of has to roll forward into the launch area, and then it has to get attached to that catch car, and then it also does this thing where it has a magnetic braking system in the launch area, so that in the case of a rollback it has some really nice brakes to stop you from crashing into another train. It rolls forward, and while it's doing this whole process, it's got this little like voice thing going, and then it says, "Get ready, here we go," in this like really deep voice, and then it launches you forward. So it's a really fun little launch process. And then I know I'm talking a lot here, but it also, where it's situated, there is a pathway that goes right next to where the launch area is, so you have like a whole audience to this launch too, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. That's all I can say at the end of the day. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, just looking at this roller coaster at a historical standpoint, because obviously I haven't ridden it, so it's the only part I can talk about. Is you're looking at a coaster kind of in a weird, awkward transition period. You're talking about at the end of the tail end of the Coaster Wars. They still wanted to make this coaster big. So that's where the 180-foot drop comes from. They still wanted that statistic, like, oh, it's almost 200 feet. So it's one of those weird kind of transition time periods where they didn't really know what they were going to do. So they're just like, let's put a hydraulic launch, 180-foot drop, 150 feet in the air. Let's do some really weird stuff with the track and inversions, and maybe it'll work. And it kind of did, but it also kind of didn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't have the same whippiness that like a Maverick has. It doesn't have the same intensity that like an I-305 would have. So it is kind of in that weird kind of middle ground where it doesn't really do anything spectacular. But I wouldn't call this a bad ride experience. Just based off watching the POV of it, it looks like an interesting ride experience. I would say it looks a little bit more pacing-wise better than Maxx Force. However, it doesn't quite, like you said, have the punchiness of a Maxx Force, but it still features the hydraulic launch, which is still better than like an LSM or an LIM launch. But it's another coaster that features inversions specific to the roller coaster. That's one thing I really want to stress about both Maxx Force and Stormrunner, is it features inversions that you can't find anywhere else. Stormrunner has the Flying Snake Dive and the Cobra Loop is what they're calling it. I don't even know if I'd call it that. And then Maxx Force with the Dog Ton and the Max Dive Loop. So they both feature two different inversions that you cannot find anywhere else on this planet. That's what that means when they're specific to the roller coaster. And that's something cool. It's unique. It's definitely, like I said, these coasters are really, really similar, even though one is S&S and one is Intamin. I think they both kind of set out to do the same thing, which is have a really awesome launch, followed by really kind of just whatever they could think of.
Yeah,
that's pretty much what these two ride experiences are. It's definitely, it's one of those things where it's like, it's memorable, you love it, or you hate it. Some people hate these roller coasters. I don't know why. But so either you love it or you hate it, but it's one of those coasters where both of these rides are never going to be in, the best ride in the park, but it's one that you're going to return to ride again and again. I call these roller coasters smile roller coasters because when you ride them, they just put a smile on your face and they make you happy. Like you said, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's enjoyable, except for Intamin restraint systems, which I'm not going to talk about. But
yeah,
it's one of those things where you get on the roller coaster and you're like, oh, this was fun. Let's do it again. The other thing I'll say about Stormrunner is, yes, it features the hydraulic launch, which no longer exists in Intamin's lineup. It's another roller coaster that suffers from reliability issues. Did you experience any of that while you were at the park?
I don't think I personally did when I was there. Every time that I went over to ride it, it was still operating. But the thing you have to think about with Hershey Park is there are a lot of freaking roller coasters over there. So I think I rode a Stormrunner 3 times while I was there, and so, like, I took quite a few there was quite a bit of time in between each time that I rode it, and, I mean, who knows, maybe it was just having a good day when I was there, so I personally didn't experience it. I don't remember having any issues trying to get on the ride, so
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think the biggest thing with Stormrunner is it's been around for a few more years, so they've been able to work out some of the kinks and issues.
yeah.
Some of it is just you get lucky. That happened to me with Lightning Rod. I got lucky and was able to ride it every time I got in line for it. So that happens. Roller coaster enthusiasts, guess what? It happens. Sometimes it's the luck of the draw of what's going to be open and what's not. That's always the thing we talk about when we're going to go somewhere is how can we prioritize that a majority of the roller coasters are going to be open. It's one of the reasons why we didn't go to Magic Mountain over the winter, because I was worried about going to the park and then running into scheduled downtimes where, I don't want to go there and then X2 is closed, because that's like half the reason I want to go to that park. So it's the same reason why we switched from Hershey Park to going to Great Adventure, because all of a sudden El Toro and King of Con were both open, and we're like, I guess we're going to go now.
After all the issues, me and Gabe were, as soon as El Toro opened, we're like, all right, we have to get over there and ride that roller coaster before they literally tear it down, because it's eventually going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, Stormrunner, it's just one of those kind of, like I said, quirky, weird. It's just, I think it's somewhat, like I said, has to do with the time period when it was built. They didn't really know what to do with roller coasters at this point. They just broke the 400-foot barrier. They were launching trains at 126 miles per hour on Kingdom Come. They're like, we can't really top that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it was just one of those things where, like, okay, let's try something different. And they haven't, Intamin hadn't quite mastered the whippiness and the intensity that a Maverick would have. And it's just like in a weird place and time, and you get a weird roller coaster out of it. But it's really interesting to see a coaster from 2004, an Intamin, and a coaster from 2019, an SNS, and how similar, even though they're two different time periods, two different coaster manufacturers, and they still came out so similar.
Oh, yeah. Before we run out of time here, I'm just going to go into a kind of a quick layout and kind of describe some of these inversions for us real quick. So, like we said, it's an initial hydraulic launch. You go from 0 to 72 miles per hour, and it sends you up that 150-foot top hat that then drops you down 180 feet at 90 degrees. That then launches you back into what Gabe said was this Cobra loop. And it's really kind of hard to describe, but it's basically you go into an initial loop and then you're kind of twisted out to the side almost. It's really, really hard to describe without being like, here's a picture. And then even then, it's like, you just got to ride it to kind of experience what it does. But then it sends you into a heartline roll that leads into this flying snake dive. And basically we describe them as two different elements, but they're almost like they lead right into each other. So it's almost one element itself that inverts you twice. And so basically you rotate through that heartline roll, and then you continue rotating as you're heading towards the ground until you're right side up near the ground again, basically. So it's like the heartline roll is straight, and then that the dive leads you towards the ground as you're still spinning. And then this final element of the ride, this isn't actually an inversion, but it's just this kind of like quick, quirky, side to side, kind of whippy transition that is the finale to already what is a weird ride, and then that leads you into the final breaks.
Yeah, I'd kind of compare that last element to almost like a twist and shout element from RMC, where it kind of just like whips you, you get a little bit of airtime, and then it twists you back the other direction. It's definitely a weird one. You could also say it might have a little bit of like the stangled dives, like on Maverick. Mm-hmm. Maybe the Maverick the Maverick element was inspired by Stormrunner, but the Maverick Stangle dives have a little bit more upside downness to it.
Yes.
Where this it's not an inversion, it's just an element. It's kind of like an airtime hill, but with like really quick transitions in and out of it. So that's why I would compare it more to like a twist and shell element like on Lightning Rod than anything else. Yeah, it is a weird moment. I think, yeah, both of these coasters are really hard to describe without actually seeing an image of them.
Yes, this is one of the few times where I almost wish I'm like, even if I could just put up a picture for you guys and be like, here, this is what it looks like at least. But yeah.
Yeah, but like the one thing I want to point out, the flying snake dive on Stormrunner and the Maxx dive loop on Maxx Force are incredibly similar when you watch them.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest difference with Stormrunners is it seems like it's a lot slower, so you get more hang time on it.
Yeah. But what this one suffers from is you're not going through it quite as fast. And it's like, so you're up high when you go through that Heartline roll. So you don't, you build speed as you go down. But these trains are so short and stuff, you don't build as much speed. And by the time that you're going through this element, I do agree that Maxx Force is obviously way faster.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest difference between Maxx Force and Stormrunners. Maxx Force runs full-size trains.
Mm-hmm.
Where is Stormrunner like Maverick, where it's the 3 cars?
Yep.
4 seats in a car? Yeah,
Yep.
So they're shorter. They're kind of like the mini trains. I don't want to call them mini because that's not what they are.
Yep.
But I call them half trains. We'll go with half trains.
Yes.
Where Maxx Force still runs a full train.
But we're kind of getting to our time here. In terms of a winner, I think I'm going to go with Maxx Force on this one. As much as these do have other elements and they are quirky inversions and they're fun little coasters, Maxx Force's launch is just a little bit better. It's just a little bit snappier. It is a tiny bit faster. Granted, it's only 3 miles per hour, but I swear to goodness you can feel it. And but it's a close race, honestly. So
it is, and I think that comes down to how similar these roller coasters are. However, you know me. I want Forces. I want the launch. I love Maxx Force's launch. I could just sit on that coaster all day long as it stayed open and just experience that launch. Honestly, for me, the launch on Maxx Force alone is going to take the cake. 0.2 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but I feel like it's even less than that. I feel like this, because Maxx Force, like, Stormrunner, and this is all Intamin launches, their punches are like halfway down the track. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like you get rolling, and then you get the punch, where Maxx Force's launch is at the very, very beginning. I mean, it's just like, you snap your fingers and you're gone. And I think that's the biggest difference between the compressed air and the hydraulic launch. And for me, I got to take Maxx Force on this one because it kicks some ass. All right. So, but with that, well, Maxx Force is the winner. We got to move on to next week. What do we got next week?
Next week is going to be a super fun, sort of nostalgia geared episode for me and Gabe. We're going to talk about our first credits ever.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I will say this. For a first credit, I'm extremely jealous of yours. Because I have not experienced your first credit.
Mm-hmm.
However, mine has one of the most aggressive moments ever on a roller coaster.
I do not understand how the hell your credit is a kiddie coaster. That thing, this is probably what started Gabe's love of being beaten up on a roller coaster and why he probably loves Millennium Force as much as he does. Or not Millennium Force, sorry, Magnum XL. Why you like being beat up on that roller coaster? It started with this thing. Well, oh my gosh.
To be fair, 99% of the roller coaster is a family coaster. It's just the last 1%.
My god. I will ask this, is it as bad as Zip and Pippin?
I'd say it's worse.
Oh,
I'd say it's worse than Zip and Pippin.
Yeah, well, You know what, everybody, join us next week for that first credit. You've gotten quite a preview of Gabe's roller coaster, and you're just gonna have to, sit around and wait for mine.
Yes, guess in the comments. Do we have comments anywhere?
You can. You're gonna have to leave. You're gonna have to make sure you actually post the podcast on your YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, I should probably do that, huh?
Anyways, join us everybody next week. You get to meet mine and Gabe's first credits.